Not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Please be seated. Traveling with children is hard. Nicole and I and the two boys took a trip this past week down to North Carolina to go see my parents, to spend some time in that place where I come from, with people I love, to get Francis and Jeremiah time with their grandparents, which they hadn't had since back in January. We hadn't been down to North Carolina in almost 2 years to see my folks. And we were stressed even before we left. Last weekend, the worry and anxiety over those questions of how are we going to get ourselves together for this trip? Where are we going to find the time to pack all the sleep stuff, all the kids stuff, all that we need? What suitcases are we going to bring? Can we fit it all in carry-on? Are we going to have to check a bag? What are we going to have to check? How many car seats do we need? Do we bring one stroller or 2 strollers? All of these questions kind of spinning out. And how are we going to get these kids up at 5:15 so that we can make it down to the Boston airport for our 8:30 flight? That was before we even left. Waiting on the other side was a whole other host of worries. How will they nap? When will they nap? Will they be able to get a nap in this travel day? And when we got there, well, will it be like sleeping in the same room as Jeremiah again? Will Francis be okay in his own room? Do we need to bring a monitor with us so we can hear them, or the door's thin enough so that the sound will carry? How do we keep Jeremiah from tumbling down the stairs? How do we keep him from eating the Legos that are the toy that Francis most wants to play with? How are they going to behave? Is Francis, when Francis has a meltdown, how is he going to be towards my parents? Is he going to be grateful enough, thankful enough? Will he be on his best behavior? How are we going to manage them? How will we make sure that Jeremiah's 5:15 wake up doesn't wake up my parents too? All of these worries just hung over me like a cloud. And so for a lot of this time, I found myself unable to settle into this place that is so comfortable, so familiar. I was plagued by these questions, these worries. Do not be afraid, little flock. That's how Jesus begins today's gospel. Do not be afraid, little flock. This reading comes on the heels of a more familiar passage from Luke. It's that do not worry about what you will eat. Do not worry about your body, what you will eat, or what you will wear, the clothes that you put on. And he goes on to talk about the lilies of the field being so clothed, and the grass that is here one day and gone the next, that if God can clothe such as these, surely he will take care of you. This whole discourse is about worry. Jesus can sense it coming from his disciples. They're worried. How are we going to follow these teachings? How are we going to do these things that Jesus says? I mean, he's saying all this wild stuff about selling all that we have and not storing up things, but trusting that God's going to provide. Well, how do we know? What if God doesn't? But what about? It's that but what about that Jesus can kind of sense creeping into their minds. That perpetual worry, that perpetual fear of not having enough, there not being enough resources, of not being prepared for the situation at hand, of not having what it takes to meet the challenges of each and every day. He can sense their worry. And that is the reason for this whole discourse, this whole conversation he's having. Do not be afraid, little flock. Through this cloud of worry that hung over me in this time in North Carolina, there are also moments like sun rays breaking through the clouds of a passing southern thunderstorm in which that worry faded away. And I would describe these moments as nothing short of moments of delight. From the first hours after we landed, We drove out to see a cousin of mine who was like an uncle, who was an important person in my life, but who hadn't seen Francis in years and never met Jeremiah. And Cousin Bill took Francis up in his side-by-side up to the ridge on the pasture to see his herd of Texas Longhorns. And so I got to watch as Francis stepped out into these, looked out on against their mothers with their 5 or 6 foot horn spans against the sky. And I got to see the delight on his face at seeing these creatures so huge, so majestic, so striking, their beauty, largeness, and their otherness. There are the moments of delight, hearing my mother at night, about coming from the room as Francis milked bedtime for all that he could, knowing that he could get one more story out of Grandma, or 6 more bumps, or any combination of those. There was a delight in hearing him laugh uproariously at the book that she had chosen to read to him and her commentary. In seeing my dad stand alongside Francis on the shore right along the banks of Fires Creek, this place where I grew up playing, going on every hot summer day to seek some reprieve from the southern heat and humidity. Seeing my dad there alongside him, teaching him how to find the perfect rock to skip, brought me back and brought me so much delight. To see the delight on my dad's face and the delight on Francis's to have this time with his grandpa. Then there was the delight I saw on the face of Turner, the deacon at the church that I grew up in, who was meeting Jeremiah for the first time. This figure, important figure in my own life, getting to meet my youngest child. And seeing Jeremiah bring him little toys or pieces of like blocks and Legos and give them to him and warm up to him immediately. The whole experience was one of delight. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom of God. It is your Father's good pleasure. Jesus is talking about God's delight. It's something we don't often think about God who is delighted, God who is tickled, God who is overjoyed, God who is just brimming, smiling, laughing, looking upon us with delight. You know, I think so often we get this conception of faith that it's a sort of one of like dutiful obligation. I'm going to do the things I need to do. I'll go to church on Sunday. I'll put my check in the plate. I'll check the boxes. I'll give elsewhere. I'll do what I need. And God's going to do what God says God's going to do. God will answer some prayers. God will show up from time to time. I might have these great moments. But it's more of a contract than anything else. I think it's easy to view religion as that, as a sort of part of our life that is about dutiful obligation on both sides. But we hear today, what we hear in these words of Jesus describing a God who seeks to provide us with the things that we need, the very basic stuff that is essential for our lives. It is a picture of God who takes delight in God's creation, a God who takes delight in the ravens and the lilies and the grasses of the field, and most importantly, takes delight in each and every one of us. Takes delight in who we are and how we move through the world, who takes delight in seeing us experience the love of God, takes delight in seeing us seek to draw closer to Christ and to God. The image of a God who takes delight, and a God who wants us to take delight as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. He goes on to say, and give alms. Sell your possessions, give it away. Share with others. This is not about a sort of giving up or sort of spiritual asceticism. It's not about this sort of detachment from the material world or material things. but is God inviting us to delight in our exercise of our faith and how we live out the teachings of Jesus and how we move through the world? Jesus is inviting his disciples to take delight in giving away what they have, in ensuring that the needs of other people are met, ensuring that their neighbors, their friends, their co-religionists, the strangers that they meet on the street have food to eat, clothes to wear, a place to live. And Jesus wants his disciples to take delight in that, to take delight in being able to provide for others, knowing that God will delight in them and provide them with the things that they need. It is so easy to get caught up in this place of worry. I know I found myself in it for parts of this trip, at a time when I could have and should have just been settling into this experience, savoring the short amount of time that I had with my parents, with these beloved people in my life. And I was grateful for those moments of delight that kind of broke that open, that helped put that worry in perspective, that helped me see that no amount of worrying about my children's behavior or how we were going to make it back on the plane to make it home was going to do anything. It was not going to make the process any easier. It was not going to change Francis or Jeremiah's behavior. It wasn't going to make Jeremiah sleep later in the morning. Ultimately, our worry had very little ability to change the reality of our lives. But opening ourselves to delight did. Opening ourselves to those little and beautiful moments allowed us to open up our hearts, allowed us to settle into the moments, to be present, to see what was happening before us and the beauty of it, to savor and to enjoy this time with multiple generations of our family, to be grateful for the time that we have together. For those times that delight dissipated the worry and allowed us to be present, to be open to receiving what came our way. So much of the rest of our gospel passage is about being ready. It's about being ready for when God shows up in our lives, being ready for the moment when Christ comes to us and says, "Come nearer, follow me." And I think if our lives are consumed with worry, which, let's be honest, they so often are, it's easy to miss those moments, miss those times when Christ shows up, miss those moments where God is seeking to break in through all the noise of our anxiety, of our worries, to say, "I am here." But I think letting ourselves take delight in one another, in the world around us, in the people in our lives, is one of those ways that we prepare ourselves, that we ready ourselves spiritually for all the places where God seeks to break in, all the ways in which God seeks to provide for us, all the ways in which God seeks to reveal God's love. There in those mountains of North Carolina, I experienced that delight. I saw it on Francis and Jeremiah's face. I saw it in my parents, and I experienced it myself. And it helped me to remember that the faith that I live is not just about dutiful obligation or what I have to do, but is ultimately about delighting in what God seeks to provide. And I think at its best can help inspire me to show that same delight in being generous towards others. I see that delighted generosity at work in this community. I think back to the solar project and the delighted generosity with which this community stepped forward and donated what it took to make that happen, to make our mark on our community, on the church, to say this is who we are, to delight in doing our part, to not be as reliant on fossil fuels, but to harvest renewable energy from the sun, to take the gift of light that God bestows on us and transform it within this community and outward into the world. I think of the delight that I see when I come in here on a Saturday afternoon and see someone carefully and beautifully arranging flowers, delighting in the beauty of color, of form, of shape, assembling something that will in turn delight those who walk into this church on Sunday morning. I think of the delight on the faces of people who I show the church for the first time when they step through those doors and they see the stained glass window framing the cross. I think of the delight that I experienced every conversation I've had with Bruce over the last few weeks as he has transformed pieces of the maple tree that was out front into a bar and tables for Freedom Cafe, and his description of different stain options and finishes, different ways to transform it into something that will give life and build community in another space. I think about the delight that I've experienced in so many of you and all the ways you participate in the life of this church, whether that's serving as lectors and readers, greeting people, putting on coffee hours, all the ways that you contribute and give to the life of this community. I see so much delight in the way that you live out your faith. And I think what this gospel today is an invitation to is to lean into that, to let the practice of our faith be one that is filled with delight. Delight over the space and the beauty of it, delight in our encounters with one another, delight in the ways that we live out our faith beyond these walls, by contributing to the needs of others, and seek to show God's love to all who we encounter in our lives. So my prayer for us on this day is that we may be a people of delight, a people who delight in God's generosity, so that God's generosity may in turn be our generosity, our delight in our own generosity towards others. May we delight in the things that God has made. May we delight in following God where He leads us, where God leads us. And may that delight make us more generous towards ourselves, towards one another, towards the world around us. And may that delight help our worries to dissipate, to fade away, so that we may see that we live and move and have our being surrounded by the love of God that is always seeking to delight in us and all that God has made. Amen.